Dzień dobry Państwu, witam serdecznie na ostatnim z tegorocznych, czy wykładów otwartych w ramach prowadzonych przy okazji seminarium profesorów Jerzego Osiedlińskiego i Kazimierza Łaskiego poświęconych postkeynesowskiej myśli ekonomicznej. To jest cykl, który mogliśmy organizować także dzięki współpracy i wsparciu ze strony Narodowego Banku Polskiego. I też w związku z tym, że zbliżamy się do końca naszego semestru, chciałbym tych z Państwa, którzy są uczestnikami seminarium profesorów, chciałbym poprosić o wypełnienie ankiet, które mogą Państwo znaleźć na siedzeniach. A dziś naszym gościem jest profesor Heiner Flassbeck, którego bliżej przedstawi Państwu profesor Jerzy Osiedliński. Ja chciałbym tylko powiedzieć, że profesor jest autorem książki 10 mitów kryzysu, która właśnie okazała się nakładem Wydawnictwa Krytyki Politycznej. Bardzo świeże egzemplarze można już nabyć w naszej księgarni, czy były dzisiaj w drukarni. A tymczasem chciałbym bardzo serdecznie powitać pana profesora Heinera Flassbecka i oddać głos panu profesorowi Jerzemu Osiedlińskiemu.
Dziękuję bardzo. This is a seminar which we run in English, there is Polish translation. Welcome everybody. It's my privilege to welcome today Professor Heiner Flassbeck. Professor Flassbeck, for several years, was the director of the Division on Globalization and Development Strategies of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. He was the principal author and leader of the team that prepared UNCTAD's Trade and Development Report. The Trade and Development Report is the flagship, the main important document which is produced annually by UNCTAD. Professor Flassbeck is a member of many international fora that deal with prospective development issues, and they are interlinking on the one hand with non-mainstream economics, and the other hand with present-day acute economic issues, the crisis of the Eurozone included. Prior to joining UNCTAD in 2000, Professor Flassbeck worked with the German Council of Economic Experts, and he also was a Deputy Finance Minister of the German Republic. As already mentioned by Michał Stowski, he is the author of the 10 myths on crisis, a book that was originally published in Germany and which sold in less than a year now over 20,000 copies, which is a very good result indeed. And thanks to the efforts of Krytyka, today we received, in a sense, as a kind of present to our today's visitor, the Polish edition of his book, 10 mitów kryzysu. Professor Flassbeck will talk today about the Euro crisis and the future of the European Union. This is a subject which is of great interest, not only for the academia, but for the population of whole Europe. Because on the one hand, even if we think that the Eurozone was established perhaps too early and over hastily, nevertheless, the consequences of a collapse or implosion of the Eurozone may have such effects on the European Union that for many of us are difficult to comprehend, difficult even to imagine. And at the same time, it's the European Union, the way of negotiating and solving natural differences in objectives of economic, foreign and other policies that after the Second World War created in Europe an environment where, true, we had some local conflicts, but we enjoyed over 65 years with no wars in Europe. So, whatever criticism we may express, and we will be expressing today, about the true causes of the crisis and the prescribed recipes that are within the mainstream, fall into the mainstream economics, we still need to remember that we should probably make every effort to help the euro survive. The problem is, can we help it survive? Persuading the Germans to change their policies, or can we save the euro against the Germans? And I think this is a big challenge, and I hope that today Professor Flassbeck will shed additional light on those issues and will help us to see the true challenges that we encounter. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation for tonight. Yeah, indeed, I tried to give you an analysis of the euro crisis in a number of some simple empirical findings, in the light of some simple empirical findings, and I will draw some political conclusions out of that. As Professor Ossetinci already said, there is a big challenge. It's indeed not only the normal kind of political challenge that you have time and again, but it's it's a vital challenge for Europe to find a solution or not. And if we don't find a solution, we said it already, then everything is possible. So for a moment, we have to go back into the causes of this crisis. You may know, I don't know how much that was discussed in Poland, but in the beginning of the euro crisis, many people said, well, it's not really a crisis of the euro, It's a crisis of some smaller countries in the south, so it's a budget crisis in Greece, or it's a real estate crisis in Spain, or so. But meanwhile, it's turning. I was, from the beginning, on the side of those who said, well, this is a systemic crisis of the euro, be careful, and analyze carefully what is behind it, and then come to conclusions. But there were a lot of mistakes where around from the very beginning, and even today or yesterday, when you look at the newspapers, the IMF has acknowledged that it was wrong in many respects in Greece, and this is true. The IMF got it wrong. Many got it wrong. Most of them that dealt with the crisis got wrong what is really happening there, and that is why we have to go back for a minute, and we have to look a bit into so to say the theoretical prejudices in the backs of the minds of these people, like the IMF and the ECB and in Brussels, to understand why they got it so wrong and what an alternative solution would be. And that's why I'm going to start this with a very simple thing. Oh, the titles are, oh, it's all in German, unfortunately, but nevertheless, at least this is in English, you see what it means. But I'm going to explain it, it's not a big problem. The crucial relationship is, I showed at the beginning, the crucial relationship is, the question is about the determination of prices. You will be surprised why the determination of prices, I come to that in a minute. But the point is we have a cultural clash, so to say, or a theoretical clash here, namely between monetarism on the one hand and different, I say in general, different kinds of critical economics on the other hand. Monetarism is about prices, inflation determined by money in a broader sense. All kinds of Kaleckian, Keynesian economics is about different determination of inflation. And if you look around, if you look for empirical evidence, you find one thing that's absolutely clear and simple, and more or less in all countries of the world, namely, the most important determinant of inflation is unit labor costs, nothing else. Unit labor cost, which is, grosso modo, nominal wages minus productivity in growth rates, so to say, that is the important determinant of inflation. And why do I talk about inflation? Well, I talk about inflation because a currency union is only one thing in principle. In its economic score, it's only one thing. It's a union of countries that want to have the same inflation rate from now on forever. Full stop. It's not a union of countries that want to have the same days of vacation every year, or a union of countries that want to have the same year at which people get retired, or things like that. There are a lot of prejudices and confusion is around about what a monetary union is. A monetary union in principle is only one thing, namely a union where the member countries give up their national inflation rate. They're defining a common inflation rate. They want to stick to that common inflation rate, and they are giving up their national monetary policy. That's a currency union. Unfortunately, this was misunderstood from the very beginning. From the very beginning, everybody talked about fiscal deficit. But what is the role of fiscal deficit in determining inflation? Very difficult to say. No evidence at all for nothing. So, but this was the first mistake, so to say, that in the Maastricht Treaty, everything was focused on fiscal questions. Why fiscal question? Well, because politicians like fiscal questions, because that is what they have in their hand, that is what they're dealing with. They're dealing with taxes, and they're dealing with public expenditure, so they're not dealing with unit labor costs. So from the first round, we had this misunderstanding that a monetary union would be mainly determined, or would be decisively steered by some kind of fiscal variables, which is not true, which is just not true. There's no evidence for that. You can have a huge fiscal deficit or small fiscal deficit, it does not change your inflation rate. So, but this is the core of the matter, and this matter was misunderstood, as I said, from the beginning. I was, when the European Monetary Union started in the year 1999, I was indeed Deputy Finance Minister of Germany. And I started to discuss with my colleagues all these problems, I come to that a bit later maybe, and said, well, what we need is, we have monetary union, you need a kind of coordination of wages. Because if it is true, and I showed it at that time already to my colleagues in Brussels, I said, if it is true, and it is true, that nominal unit labor costs, nominal wages minus productivity, national productivity, determine the inflation rate in each country, well then you need a certain coordinating mechanism, a coordination mechanism to bring about similar inflation rates. But everybody and the ECB, mainly the ECB, said no, this is bad economics, this is the market will determine the wage developments, because the labor market is a market, and so if the labor market is a market, then how can you talk about coordination of a market result? That's impossible. So that was the beginning of the misunderstanding, the beginning of the problem. So I jumped this one. I go to the core of the matter right away, namely, this is the same thing, unit labor costs for several European countries, and it's in the form of an index. 1999 is 100, and it runs, so accumulates the unit labor cost developments in different countries, in different regions. Can I stand up? Is it
problem? Sure.
I'm used to standing when I speak. It's strange when it's sitting around. So, and we have the unit labor cost development. You see in the blue line is European Monetary Union without Germany, and the orange line is Germany. In the middle, the black line is the inflation target. We had an inflation target. There was a clear idea about the inflation target. The ECB decided for all member countries, and all member countries agreed that the inflation target should be 2%. Nothing else. 1.9. So we have accumulated here 1.9%, and if you accumulate 1.9% inflation rate all the time, you end up somewhere at 128 already. EMU, without Germany, overshot this inflation target a little bit. But you see, there's one country that undershot this inflation target quite a bit, and that was Germany. If I show it to you in a bit different way, you see here we have now Southern Europe and France. The rest of Europe split into Southern Europe and France. If you look at this chart, you see it even clearer. Southern Europe clearly up to 2008 overshot the target quite a bit, but the undershooting of Germany was bigger. So from the beginning, in terms of unit labor cost and of prices, you could show it in national price terms exactly the same way. It's exactly the same. In terms of prices and in unit labor costs, the whole thing was a failure from the very beginning. So it was not that after 2008 something emerged that killed the European Monetary Union, not after the financial crisis. No. From the very beginning there was a big problem, namely this divergence that happened in the first 10 years. We can discuss later why Germany did what it did, but there are many reasons for that, but we have to take account of this simple fact. And so what does it mean? What does it mean? Well, you can read this chart very simply. You can say a product, a similar product, let's assume there are some similar products are there, definitely. A similar product that had a price of 100 euros in 1999 now would have, on average, would have a price in Southern Europe of something like 130, in France of 128, and in Germany of 110. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem in the monetary union, because what will be the result? Well, the result is very simple. People everywhere in the monetary union start buying German products because Germany is undervalued, so to say. It's a kind of an undervaluation. Well, you have the concept of real exchange rate. If you turn it into real exchange rate, it's a devaluation of a real exchange rate inside a monetary union where you do not have nominal exchange rate, where you don't have exchange rate anymore. You have no nominal currency, but it's a kind of real depreciation of Germany. And that's a problem. Whenever I studied all the financial crises in history all over the world in the last 10 years, and if you study all the crises in the world, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, whatever you have, you find one similarity, and the one similarity is very simple, that says once a country is overvalued by 20–25%, a crisis will come and it has to devalue. Simple like that. The crisis will come, definitely, and it has to devalue. That was true for Argentina, was true for Brazil, was true for Russia, was true for Hungary, for many, many countries. So, and this is a simple story. So what is the result of this? The result of this is we have diverging current account balances. We have a surplus in the country that has devalued. We have deficits in the countries that have revalued, that have lost competitiveness. So Germany has dramatically gained competitiveness since the beginning of the euro, and the others have dramatically lost competitiveness. So this adds up in accumulated current account balances. This is the current account balance in percent of GDP, and you see Germany now for a number of years has a current account surplus of 6% of GDP, which means that something like 180 billion euro every year Germany has to export to the rest of the world so that the rest of the world can buy German products, more than Germany imports. And for the other countries as well, you see it has changed a bit. The current account deficit has gone a bit down, but this is mainly the result of the huge depression that we have in Southern Europe. But you see even a country like France, which had a bit of a surplus before the European Monetary Union, went into deficit and is stable in deficit. So the answer is, if that is so simple, why is it not discussed? And it's not really discussed. But now it starts. It's just, we just have the turn of the tide, so to say. At this moment of time, the discussion goes in different ways. But for 3 years, for the first 3 years of the crisis, this was not discussed at all. For a very simple reason, because Germany refused to discuss it. And Germany refused to discuss this, it's easy to understand, because from the very beginning it was absolutely clear in Germany that Germany had got everything right and the others got everything wrong. So, and how could you then discuss a diagnosis like that, where Germany has gone wrong also? That was denied. It was just pushed aside. It was not taken into account at all. So, compare, for example, just to show, because now the discussion gets very hot in Europe. Discussion is getting hot because the deficit countries, well, now they're in trouble. The deficit countries are in trouble. And with the deficit countries in trouble, the question arises, so what can we do? And the deficit countries have to change dramatically, obviously. But it is still unclear who was wrong and who was right in this whole game. And then I would like to show you in a famous chart that was, it is called in German the Draghi Irrtum, the Draghi error, because a couple of weeks ago, it was one of the European summits. This is what the German media say, but it seems to be true because it came from several media and it was never denied, and there was no dementi from the European Central Bank. So Mario Draghi provided the European Council with a chart saying, you see what has gone wrong in Europe now that they start discussing this. What has gone wrong in Europe, namely, the Germans, this is German nominal wages, not real wages in Germany, but nominal wages in Germany, so not unit labor cost, but nominal wages, just nominal wages without anything else, and nominal wages in Germany and productivity. And clear, unit labor costs are close to zero in Germany, which implies that nominal wages did not rise much more than productivity in Germany. So this is what the chart says. You see, in Germany, nominal wages never rose more than productivity. If you compare that to France, you see where the disaster is. In France, wages rose too much. Wages are too high in France compared to Germany. You see? But that's definitely wrong. That's definitely wrong. Because what France did, France was a nice country, and France did exactly stick to the inflation target of the European Central Bank has decided. So that is where we are. Mr. Draghi accuses France of doing the wrong thing, although France is the only country that has had a wage policy according to the inflation target of the European Central Bank. That's a little paradox that we are facing, one of the paradoxes. But you see, this is how the discussion goes. The discussion goes around the critical factor. Why is the discussion going around the critical factor? Well, for a very simple reason, because Germany is the critical factor. And nobody wants to accuse Germany openly of doing wrong things. I'm the only person around that, more or less. Maybe 2, 3 others somewhere. So, what happens now, as Germany says, well, the others are wrong. Now, as I said, we're discussing this problem, the problem of competitiveness, but the conclusion is again wrong. Namely, they say Germany nevertheless got everything right and the others got everything wrong, so don't discuss government debt anymore and these things. But if you just look at the competitiveness, you see that Germany was right, the others were wrong. So if you look now at a number of countries, some more countries, like we have now, if you look at Spain and Greece, in addition to and Italy, you see what happens. The German conclusion for the solution of the problem is very simple. The Germans say, do what we did. Huh? You just do what we did because we were right. You have to adjust to our strategy. So what Germany asked the other countries to cut their wages. Huh? You see, if you look at Spain and you look at Greece, they cut their wages quite a bit already. They cut their wages in Greece by 20–25% already. And this has resulted, as we all know, this has resulted in a dramatic development. It has not resulted in improvement in the situation, but it has resulted in a deterioration of the overall economy. Wage cuts are bad, to say it very clearly. Wage cut is not a good thing, but it's a bad thing. Why is to cut wages a bad thing? Only in neoclassical theory it's a good thing because it leads to substitution of capital against labor, so more labor is employed and nothing else happens, which is nonsense, which is a nonsensical theory. What in reality happens is you cut wages, and the first thing that happens is that people cut their expenditure. What should they do? If your wages are cut tomorrow by 20%, what would you do? You would cut your expenditure. Very simple like that. And in all these countries in Southern Europe, domestic demand that is mainly fed by wages, so to say, is much more important than external demand. So there's everywhere a relationship of 75% domestic demand to 25% export demand. The only country where it's the other way around is Ireland. Ireland has 105% export demand, so if you cut wages there, it can be successful, but never, never in Southern Europe. So this policy of cutting wages, as I said, has led already to a dramatic deterioration of the economic situation in the countries, in Greece, in Spain, and Portugal, mainly. The other thing, but they have not yet reached Germany. Huh? To reach the German level of competitiveness, they have to go further. They need another 20% cut in the next years. Then they have reached the blue line. If Germany goes on like that, Germany will go on like that, a bit like that. So they have really come further down. The problem is only if they come further down, their domestic situation will deteriorate further. Sorry, it's not too bad with my cup, but I have to drink something. It's over, it's just the rest of the cold. So, the dramatic thing in this chart are two things, or three things. The first is the implication of the German demand that everybody does what Germany did would mean that everybody goes down like this here, down to the blue line, which would mean definitely for Europe as a whole deflation. first and most simple implication is that we would have deflation everything, for sure. Absolutely sure, absolutely unavoidable. Nobody talks about it, but it's absolutely clear. The second is that if the countries reach the German blue line, they have not yet achieved very much. Because what we're talking here about is absolute competitiveness. It's the level of wages or the level of prices. If you have reached the price level of your competitor, you have not gained anything at this moment of time. What you need to gain something, to gain market shares and to take something, to get something back from what you have lost in the last 10, 20 years, you have to go below the blue line. You have to go there somewhere. That is the very brutal implication of this divergence that we had in the last 10 years. You have to go below the blue line, so that means another 10 years of depression and wage cut in Spain and in Portugal and in Greece. Is it possible? No, it's not possible. The third indication of this chart is, or the most dramatic thing is, on this chart, that the two countries, the most critical countries, namely Italy and France, have not yet done anything. They have not yet adjusted at all. They are both in recession already, but they are not adjusted at all. You see, their unit labor costs go on as before. So their gap to Germany is not closing a little bit. And that means they have no chance to survive economically. It's very simple like that. They will lose, lose, and lose out against Germany in the whole rest of the world. So their market share is anyway dramatically reduced in the last 10 years, so it will go further down. So on the export side, they will go to zero. That's impossible. But on the other hand, if France and Italy would do the same as Spain and Greece have done already, what would it mean? Well, it would clearly mean that we would have unemployment of 20–25% in France and Italy as well. So imagine in Europe where we have unemployment of 25% in the whole of the Mediterranean countries. Will it be politically possible? The answer, my answer is no. So whatever you do, there's no way out. There is no way out. Be sure, there's no way out. Along these lines that Germany prescribes, there's no way. So what could be done? Well, the solution is very simple. The solution is simple. If the others cannot go down, Germany has to go up. To close the gap in competitiveness, this is up to 2022. The scenario, you could do it up to 2032, or I don't mind how long you stretch the process. But if the cutting of wages doesn't work because it destroys the domestic economy and produces unemployment, then you have to do it in a smoother way. You have to do it to have to stretch the whole process over time. But it's absolutely clear that this gap has to disappear. But even then, if you go to 2022, you see the task is not achieved, then you have to go further on. Germany has to increase its wages another 10 years, so that in 2032, maybe you have a solution that is viable where the other countries can survive. Where the other countries can survive. But that means, obviously, that wages would have to rise in Germany now. It's, this is just a number, something like 5% in nominal terms for the next 20 years in a market. Now come the market advocates and say, but it's a market. No, it's not a market. First of all, it's not a market. And second, this was not a market result as well. Why did German unit labor costs not rise? Well, because the government put enormous pressure on the market. It was not even a market result. It was a huge political pressure that were put on the wages in Germany with all these wonderful reforms in inverted commas that they have done, Agenda 2010 and Hartz reforms and so on. So that was the result of a government intervention. So the simple conclusion is you need a government intervention into the other direction, namely in terms of rising wages, and then there is a chance for the euro to survive. This, to be clear, in my view, is the only chance for the euro to survive. The only chance. There's no one. Well, the rest is nitty-gritty. If we don't do that, and if we don't do something like that soon, then the euro is dead. So Poland should consider thinking about the euro, whether they should go the way of Lithuania and others. Latvia yesterday was formally acknowledged a member. So, do you want to become a member of a dying club? That's a good question. Now, why is it all like that? So, Misha, you have to. Can you explain the first line? There's an elephant in the room. In English, you say it's an elephant in the room. It's
Słoń w składzie porcelany.
Ah, yeah, you have it in Polish also. Yeah. There's an elephant in the room, but nobody, as it is usual with elephants in the room, nobody looks at them. That's why you say there's an elephant in the room, but nobody touches the elephant. Nobody even acknowledges that there's an elephant. Oh, there's an elephant. Oh no. What people do, they're mending the cups. They're mending the cups. All the cups are broken, but no elephant. No elephant. So let's talk about the elephant. The elephant in the room is clearly Germany. That's no doubt. And I show you now in just a different way to show it why Germany is the elephant in the room, and why Germany has to change dramatically so that we have a chance to, the euro has a chance to survive. And I should repeat it again. I was always in favor of the euro. I'm still in favor of the euro. I'm not against the euro at all. The euro was a very good idea. It was a very good idea. But the best idea doesn't work if it cannot be managed, if you don't have the people who are able to manage it. You can invent the best machine of the world that produces everything for everyone, but if nobody can really manage the machine, well, then you have to throw it away. It doesn't work. And the management of the euro was a disaster. Not the euro as such. The euro was a very good idea. So what happened to Germany? And this is very interesting in terms of some people say, well, if you have companies out there and you have advertisements everywhere, then what you have is a market economy. That's what many people believe. If it looks like a market economy, it must be a market economy. It's not true. A market economy is something quite complicated. And I show you why Germany is not a market economy. Not a reasonably well-functioning market. You see, this is the 60s in Germany. And this is the financial flows. That's the simple bookkeeping. What I'm doing now is macroeconomic bookkeeping. It's the financial flows, so the net balances of the different sectors in Germany. So the savings, the net savers, and the net debtors. Everything above zero is a net saver. Everything below zero is a net debtor. So in the 60s, we had a functioning market economy in Germany, namely private households were saving. This private household saving was 6% of GNE, I think is here, so the national income. The government and the foreign countries had a balance very close to zero. Oh, I should say, this has to add up to zero. There cannot be a saver without a debtor, and no debtor without a saver, so it's always zero. This always adds up exactly to zero. If people believe there's too much debt in the world, it's wrong. There's no debt in the world. No net debt. The net debt of the world is always exactly zero. So what happened in the 60s? What we had in the 60s is that the natural counterpart, so to say, of the private household savings were the company's debt. So companies took the money from the bank that the private savers deposited there and spent it for investment. That's a market economy. For me, that's a market economy, nothing else. We don't need the government all the time. If the companies do their job, you don't need the government all the time. People say, I'm Keynesian, maybe, but I'm not in favor of permanent government indebtedness. If people don't like government indebtedness, okay, no problem. But then the company sector has to do more in terms of being the debtor, the natural debtor, so to say, of the private household, who are the natural saver. So now look at the first 10 years of the new century, and you see this is the brave new world of new German capitalism or market economy, which is totally perverse. Still, the private households are savers. But now we have a new phenomenon, namely the German companies are also savers. The German companies are net savers. They have too much money. They're depositing the money with the banks. And the government is going close to zero now. Meanwhile, it's zero already. So if you would go a bit further, it's zero already. And the government has put a debt brake in the constitution that there should be no government debt anymore in the future. So very nice. All Germans are savers. They're solid people, huh? They're good people. They're all saving. Yeah, but unfortunately you cannot save if you don't have a debtor. So who is the debtor? The natural debtor, so to say, for Germany is the other countries. So all the German savings are exported to the rest of the world in the hope that someone is going to invest this money. But unfortunately we do not know whether they're investing it or consuming it, nobody knows. But this is the solution, this is the German solution. This year we have 180 billion net savings in Germany, 180 billion. And there must be a counterpart for the 180 billion new net savings, which is new net debt, but it's not taking place in Germany, it's all outside. What is the current account situation of Poland? Is deficit? Deficit. In Germany, quite a big deficit.
Minus 3 GDP.
3, yeah, so you're the savers, you're the debtors, so welcome. Welcome for investing in the German savings. Yeah. So but this now has to change. This has to change because the debtors are dead. Huh? The debtors are no longer good debtors. They are defaulting. So what are we going to do? Yeah, this is the question that has to be posed. It should be posed in Brussels every day whenever a German politician shows up. They should ask him the question, so what are you going to do about your savings? But there's never asked the question. So what is going to happen? Well, the solution is very simple. This blue line, this red line has to go into positive territory. Very simple like that. Because if a debtor wants to reduce his or her debt, they have to become a saver. That's very clear. Otherwise you cannot repay debt. If you want to repay bad debt. So the Germans are asking everyone to repay debt. You know? You're bad debtors, you should adjust. So it's not only that they need the foreign countries for being the debtors, but they accuse them for being bad debtors. Or for being debtors at all, which is very consistent policy. And in addition, imagine that's the high philosophy of German economic policy. First of all, we are fighting the other countries. We're doing competition of nations. We're better than them. We're crowding them out of all the international markets. Then we give them our savings and ask them to invest our savings properly so that they can pay our pension in 30 years. That's reasonable policy. So that is what we did in the last 10 years. They should pay our pensions with the investment that they do with our savers, but they cannot invest because we're killing them before. Wonderful. So this has to go up. So what is the solution? Well, the simple solution is the German companies have to become debtors. It's simple like that. If the government has to keep out, and the constitution says the government should not have any debt anymore, then there's only one way, or two ways. You could convince the German households to stop saving, which will be difficult. Or you convince the German companies to become debtors. That's the only way, that's the only feasible solution for Europe and for the world as a whole. By the way, Germany is not very much criticized in Europe because they're all afraid of the elephant. But in the G20, I've been sitting in the G20 the last 2 years, there are some other elephants, bigger elephants even, and they're criticizing Germany heavily for their surplus. So the only way out would be, and that is the German solution, that now as everybody does what Germany did in the past, we are having huge surpluses vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Poland, only 3%, that's not much. You could have 6 or 9. 3.5% this year. Huh? 3.5%. Yeah, but you could have more. Why not a bit more? Why not a bit more? China has a surplus up to now, they should have deficit. Japan should have deficit. US always have deficit, they are natural debtors, they should have more deficit. So, Europe is going for a solution where everybody goes up here, so that we need a huge new red line, so to say, that is only only defined of other countries outside Europe. I can tell you that's nonsense. It's plain nonsense. No? Because the simple thing is that nobody understands. Nobody wants to be a debtor. Nobody wants to be a debtor. And why does nobody want to be a debtor? Because the debtors are always the bad guys. Huh? In the German language, it's even the same word. Der Schuldner ist schuld. Huh? The debtor is guilty. It's the same word. And for us, it's the association is absolutely perfect. The debtor is bad. And all the debtors were treated very badly in the past, in the history, in the last 30, 40 years. If you go through the history of the debtors in the developing world and elsewhere, it was always a policy of punishing the debtor. Whenever a country had a debt, whenever a country had a current account deficit, and whenever a country needed the help of the International Monetary Fund, what happened? They were punished like hell. They got the same treatment as Spain and Portugal and Greece got already. It only worked out a bit better in these cases. I can tell you, as I said, I studied all these crises in very much detail. Formally, in the last 30 years, it worked out a bit better, although the punishment to the IMF was as stupid as it is today, because these countries depreciated their currencies. The only way out for all of these crises was the depreciation, nothing else, nothing else. Not the IMF conditionality, nothing like that. It was all plain nonsense as it is today. The only thing that was different in the former crisis compared with the Eurozone is that they devalued. And the devaluation was much more efficient, or was the only efficient measure that you have. Because devaluation improved after a time your competitiveness, but it did not destroy your domestic demand as wage cuts do. Now you're cutting wages across the board, you kill your domestic demand, your unemployment is rising, and you don't have any positive effect, you only have negative effect, your whole conditionality is negative. So the debtor was always punished, and that is what no one wants to be a debtor. Go to Latin America, no country wants to be a debtor. Go to Asia, no the Asians anyway never wanted to be a debtor, and once they were after the Asian crisis, they never want to be a debtor again. Go to China, us, and they say everything but not a current account deficit, because then we are debtor, then we're dependent on the rest of the world. The United States, the only natural debtor, so to say, in the world, because they can actually be they're indebted in their own currency. But if they say we don't want to be a debtor anymore, so we don't have debtors. We're lacking debtors in the world. And that is why, by the way, that is why the central banks in this world are cutting interest rates to zero and doing crazy things. Yeah, not because there's too much debt, not because there's too little debt. Otherwise, that policy would be foolish to cut interest rates all the time to zero. The only idea behind it is to have more debtors, to incentivize debtors, people to become debtors, but nobody wants to be a debtor. So what are we going to do with our savings? That's the problem. That's the crucial problem of the market economy in the next 20, 40, 50 years. And if we don't reinvent policies that make the companies the debtors, that bring companies down here, and the policies are very simple. The policies are through taxation of company profits, much higher taxation, and through wage increases that are reasonable and are in line with productivity very consistently every year for everyone in the whole country. Then we will never come back to a normal market economy. Because the market economy is deeply distorted. It's deeply distorted. Many people believe we're living and we're working in a normal market economy. It's not true. It's not true at all. That is why I show you my last my last chart. Do I still have 1 minute or 2 minutes? I'm coming to you. And this I can show you in a different way. I jumped over this chart. You see, this is I call it the big paradox. The big paradox, which for me means that we have to change the way we are thinking radically, or we're going to be lost everywhere in the world, is the development of the labor market. You see, that starts 1970, that's the wage share. The blue line is the wage share for the whole industrialized world. So Japan, Europe, United States, all industrialized countries. The wage share was 60-something%, and then went down. So what happened in the 70s, you see, if you look at the 70s, it's quite interesting. We had a jump in the wage share, we had an increase in the wage share, and we had an increase of unemployment later, a bit later. And that was the crucial idea where the neoliberal people came in, the monetarists and others came in and said, you see what happens, the market economy is deeply distorted due to these Keynesian policies, these crazy inflationist policies, because what you've got now, you've got high inflation due to rising wages, and you've got high unemployment at the same time. And this was the end of Keynesianism. This was the crucial point that killed Keynesianism in my opinion. This was the crucial point because the Keynesians never found an adequate answer to this accusation. So what happened afterwards, the wage share came down all the time with some cyclical swings, but that's not important. You see the wage share went down all the time. The unemployment rate went down a little bit, and mainly then in the bubble years here of the 2000s. But here comes the crucial thing. You see what happened now? What happened now, and this is the big paradox, now we have the lowest wage share in the world in the last 50 to 60 years since the Second World War. And what happened? Unemployment has reached the highest level ever. The highest level ever. This should not have happened, you see? This is impossible according to the neoclassical theory. It's absolutely impossible. You have with the lowest wage ever and with everybody complaining about high inequality and things like that and too low wages of the low-skilled people. At the same time, you have the biggest jump in unemployment upwards. And this is exactly the opposite what a market would forecast. In a market, if you have a surplus of supply, it must be the result of too high wages. It cannot be the result of low wages, of low prices. Prices or wages. So this is the paradox that we are living in now. And this is the final refutation, in my view, of the neoliberal paradigm. This was not as, if you look carefully at what happened here, you would see it never happened along the lines of neoclassical market description or so, market analysis. It was a complicated process due to the inflationary stimulation by the oil prices, then wages came in, then monetary policy got restrictive, and so on. I don't want to tell the story. But it was very difficult to refute. It was very difficult to refute because it seemed so obvious that there is a clear correlation between too high wages and too high unemployment. So now we can only hope that the Keynesian, Kaleckians and the others are going to use this. You have to use this every day to show to people that the market doesn't work. There is no market. The labor market is no market. And this is extremely important. The labor market is not a normally functioning market. The labor market is not like a potato market. And if we're able to get across this message that the labor market is not a market, and we can show it in many respects. This is one aspect, in my view, the most important one. But if we can show it in many respects that the labor market is not a market, then we can win the battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Zanim oddam mikrofon profesorowi Jerzemu Osieklińskiemu, chciałbym dokonać drobnej korekty w tym, co powiedziałem a propos ankiet, ponieważ ta ankieta akurat dotyczy samego wykładu, a nie seminarium, w związku z czym nie tylko uczestników seminarium, ale wszystkich Państwa tutaj zgromadzonych bardzo serdecznie prosiłbym o pomoc nam i wypełnienie ankiet. W międzyczasie oczywiście czasem oddaję głos panu profesorowi Osieklińskiemu.
This was a parish announcement of technical issue.
Okay.
We come back to your lecture and we open the question and answer part of our tonight's meeting. Please introduce yourself and the floor is yours. You're being brief is appreciated because other people. Okay.
My name is Hans Better. I want to ask you, so if the labor market is no market,
Yeah.
so who is responsible for the market?
Yeah.
Who should stage?
Yeah.
Who should make
Yeah.
the wages?
Yeah.
That's one question. Second is, I didn't understand what you meant, because on one hand you say that they do not understand it. So there is a technical problem of understanding the whole mechanism which you described. But isn't it true that it is this mechanism is to an ideologisierung, ideologisation? That means it is not a not understanding, it is a not willing understand the